Marie Antoinette movie review. So this is a movie review of that 2006 Marie Antoinette biopic starring Kirsten Dunst. Before I get into reviewing it, actually, I've got something I've got to get off my chest. Roger Ebert had kind of a golden rule of movie reviewing, which was you always review the film that you saw, not the film that you wished you had seen. In other words, kind of evaluate what the director is trying to do, and evaluate how successful he is at trying to do how successful he is at doing what he's trying to do, and don't kind of complain about how you wish the movie had been about this or you wish the movie had been about that. That being said, I kind of do feel that in America, we have a tendency to kind of tell stories about the French Revolution, which focus a little bit too much on Louis XVI or Marie Antoinette, and kind of making them out to be the main protagonists in the French Revolution. I'm not entirely sure why we do this. I think if you look at literature and movies produced by the French, I've got to be a little bit careful here because I don't actually speak French, so I'm entirely reliant on English translations of stuff. French movies that have been subtitled or translated into English. But, you know, for example, the La Révolution Française, the French movie about the French Revolution, which came out in 1989, had Marie Antoinette in it, but was much more kind of focused on the Republican protagonists, you know, Robespierre and Marat and Danton and Desmoulins and the kind of what was happening on the Republican side. A novel like 93 by Victor Hugo is again kind of focusing on not what's happening to Marie Antoinette, but you know what's happening in the Republican convention that they set up. You would think that Americans, with kind of our obsession with talking about democracy and republicanism, would be much more interested in what was happening in the Republican side of the French Revolution. Not that all of it was necessarily good. I mean, Marat and Robespierre and stuff like that turned out to be disasters. But that's kind of the point, is this kind of it's illustrative of kind of maybe the pitfalls that can happen when setting up kind of popular governments. Instead, though, we have this obsession with telling the French Revolution by focusing on the royal family. I don't know why we do this. I think maybe because we share a common language with the English, maybe we kind of pick this up from England, you know, kind of Charles Dickens' novels, A Tale of Two Cities, or kind of English historians who kind of write about this kind of stuff. Or, you know, maybe, this is going to be a little bit controversial, but maybe we Americans are not as democratic as we like to believe. Maybe we're kind of inherently more fascinated with stories about royalty than we are about democracy. I mean, that may explain kind of the prominence of you know, why the royal wedding and stuff like that is such big news in America when something like that happens in England. Okay, rant over. I've gotten that off my chest. I don't really understand what this kind of fascination with Marie Antoinette is. That off my chest, let's just talk about the movie and evaluate how successful the filmmakers were at telling the story that they wanted to tell. I thought it was pretty accurate on the historical side. I mean, I'm no expert, but I do read a bit. And kind of bits and pieces that I've kind of read in various histories of France or histories of the French Revolution kind of popped up in this movie. For example, I remember reading somewhere that Marie Antoinette, you know, she was from Austria, right? She wasn't born into the French royal family. She married into it as an outsider. And she could not understand these kind of long ceremonies that were part of the French royal family. Like, she used to lose her patience with the long dressing ceremonies early in the morning. when she'd be shivering in the cold because she couldn't even dress herself. Her courtiers had to kind of hand her stuff and debate protocol about who handed her what and stuff like that. I remember reading that in a book years ago, and that's in the movie. So, you know, they got that out of real history and faithfully put it into the movie. And it is kind of interesting for what it's worth. I was complaining earlier about too much focus on Marie Antoinette, but you know, these are exactly the little kinds of details that make this stuff interesting. The movie, I don't know if anyone remembers this, it was heavily criticized when it came out for being anachronistic. And I think this was largely based because they incorporated rock music into the soundtrack. And they also had some kind of anachronistic props, you know, kind of shoes that wouldn't have been around at that time and stuff like that. I don't really care about that stuff so much. As far as the actual kind of events, like what happened, when, and to whom, I think this is largely accurate. I looked it up on Wikipedia afterwards. Somebody let me know if I'm missing something. I mean, what I got out of Wikipedia is that there were some debatable rumors and gossip that were kind of circulated around the court at the time, but may or may not have been true. And they got put into this movie as if they were true. But that's what a movie does. And more generally, that's what historical fiction does. I mean, when you're doing a drama, you can't say to the audience, now, historians are about 30% sure this happened. There's a little bit of doubt about what this happens. You just have to look at kind of what were the different possible narratives, and then you just have to pick stuff and make choices. So I think that's all legitimate. And, you know, it was interesting for what it was worth, learning about the French royal court and the rivalries and gossip of the time. The film stays clear of politics, and this was kind of an intentional choice on the part of the filmmakers to tell the story about Marie Antoinette and her kind of domestic life at court, rather than getting into the larger political scene. The question is, how much do I really care about Marie Antoinette's kind of rivalries and gossip? It's interesting to an extent. But the filmmaker's assumption that I was going to be interested in this for a whole 2 hours is pushing things a little. Maybe that's just me, but I felt a little bit bored as this went on. And then the film ends just at the beginning of the French Revolution. So, spoilers, I guess. It ends as King Louis and Marie Antoinette are being forcibly escorted to Paris. Now, this was not the end of their lives. They would live kind of several more years after this, although their lives would get more and more miserable from this point on. But, yeah, it's an interesting choice. And it does kind of make you wonder, why are we watching this? I mean, what's the point? What are they trying to tell us? Presumably there was a message in here somewhere, but I don't know. Now, Marie Antoinette is not disconnected from the French Revolution. Her lavish spending was one of the causes of the French Revolution. Depending on who you talk to, her lavish spending may or may not have been exaggerated by the pamphleteers at the time. But it was definitely something that was a motivating factor, the resentment against her, to cause the French Revolution. They hint at this only oh so briefly in the movie. I was watching a documentary on the French Revolution. I think this was done by the History Channel. And I remember one of the historians they were interviewing said Marie Antoinette was the Imelda Marcos of her time. Imelda Marcos, if you don't know, was the wife of the Prime Minister of the Philippines, or dictator of the Philippines, I guess, who just had this very lavish lifestyle, collected thousands and thousands of shoes in her closet. Well, the people outside of the palace were in miserable conditions and kind of starving. And yeah, I think you could make the same criticism of Marie Antoinette. You could. But this film largely stays clear of it. So what is left then? Well, we've got a portrait of a woman isolated and made miserable amidst all her privilege. In fact, arguably made miserable because of all her privilege. And the movie positions you to feel very sympathetic towards Marie Antoinette, kind of feel sorry for her. And you do. I mean, I don't want to sound like I'm completely heartless. One does kind of feel sorry for everything that she went through, even before the horrors of the French Revolution. She was married off for political reasons and then had to adjust to all the absurdities of the stupid traditions of the French royal court at Versailles. I think there's a lot more interesting stories to be told in history. Like if I was in charge of who was making Hollywood biopics. But again, Roger Ebert's rule: review the movie that you saw, not the movie that you wished you had seen.